Welcome to the Education Corner, a podcast by Education Choices magazine. Today on the Education Corner podcast, we are so excited to welcome successful young British tennis player Ben Draper. We are also joined by Richard Garrett of RMG Associates, who specialises in community investment strategy in support of young people. They've worked together over the years to help develop Ben's sporting potential.
We're thrilled to welcome you, Ben, to Education Corner podcast and to be able to hear a little bit more about your tennis career and how well you're doing. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your early tennis career?
Yeah, so with a lot of people that start playing tennis, I started playing at a young age. Tennis runs in my family. My grandmother was a very good player and coach, and my mother was a very good player. My brother's also a very good player. So I was always around tennis. My mum used to coach at a club called Sutton Tennis and Squash Club, and myself and my brother would have time after school where she was coaching, and we'd have time to kill where we had a racket in our hand, and the racket looked huge in comparison to us. But that's how we kind of learned to hit the ball for the first time. From then on, I think we were always close to tennis. We always loved watching tennis. And we continued to play and improve right until now.
How old were you when you first held a tennis racket?
It's a long, long time ago. I think I was probably very little, probably 2 years old, 3 years old. And then maybe I started playing properly. You know, I say properly, but I started to actually take a real interest in it, maybe about 5 or 6. But I remember my brother was hitting a ball against the garage door when he just kind of started walking almost. So he was very young.
Richard, you had something to say?
Well, I just think it's very interesting that you hear Ben saying he started at 2. And for example, in one of the participation schemes that I've set up in Ackworth in Yorkshire, there were 9, 10 and 11-year-olds who had never ever seen a tennis court before when they were invited to play in a community tennis festival.
Yeah, it's something that the earlier you have access, kind of it gets in your bones, doesn't it? But not everyone gets the access that they should.
No, and I think that's one of the most important things for the development of any sport or interest. We have to try and get early access created, and not only early access, also the opportunity for those who start playing and show potential to develop in the same way as Ben has done.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads on to my next question in a way. You've mentioned already tennis, even through to your grandmother, has played a big part in your family life. How do you feel that, obviously, your father was chief executive of the Lawn Tennis Association, your mother was a former coach and athlete. How were they able to support you and your brother in the early years?
Well, as I mentioned, my family's always been in tennis, but I think that the number one way in which they really helped was just by investing their time, whether it be taking us to tournaments on the weekend or after they come back from work and after we'd finished school, we would sometimes go out and train. So it's just a huge time commitment, and they were always there to support, as I said, whether it be traveling with myself and my brother or being a kind of emotional support when just lost a tough match and you're very unhappy. But they were fantastic and always supported us and always pushed us to try and be the best we could.
There's a really, really important point that Ben is making there. So much of sporting success is developed through the time and trouble that the parents take. And sometimes that shared aspiration in a particular interest is sadly just not there. But also, if you look at the history of the high performance scheme that Ben was a beneficiary of in his school days, when that first started, the facilities were actually located off the school site, which meant that the players actually, similarly to having parents running them around, had to have a driver that took them to the facility. And really, to achieve highly advantageous high performance scheme, you have to have it all located in the same space. And not only that, you have to have a very close proximity with the educational side, because you know, not even in Ben's case can you guarantee, and in Jack's place, can you guarantee that there's going to be that success, and they need to have something that they can fall back on if things don't work out with their chosen sporting career or specialism.
we have a lot of children who come to us through the consultancy who are on the circuit, and we covered a parent who was also a competitive player, and that was also one of the points that they raised, was making sure that you still get the education so that you do have a backup in case perhaps you don't make it all the way. Can you talk to me a little bit about how Reed's school in Cobham helped support you with your tennis career?
Fantastic teachers, weren't they, Ben?
Fantastic. That was going to be my answer, Richard. No, I think that Reed's helped me massively. I think that at Reed's, I was given the opportunity to have a platform and resources around me that enabled me to really focus on my tennis and my academics. As Richard mentioned, we had the tennis facility on site, so I could go to class in the morning, sometimes even waking up early at 6:45. Did a lot of those in the indoor centre to do fitness. I don't miss those so much now, but at the time they were great. And then we go to class, and then you'd have tennis in the afternoon, and it was a very convenient setup for players. And so Reed's helped me massively, and I appreciate all the time that I spent there. And I look back now and I think, wow, the setup that we had there was amazing. And maybe I didn't quite appreciate at the time just how much time and effort was put in behind the scenes. I think that maybe I didn't realize that the role that Richard played in setting up, I think it was the Slater squads originally, but then went to Reed's being a high performance centre, and it just helped me immeasurably.
Ben, I've got a bit of a memory lane question for you. Am I right in thinking that when you first joined Reed's, you weren't quite into the performance bit and you had to demonstrate?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So when I first came to Reed's, one of the things which Richard just mentioned was that at Reed's, one of the main things that's helped me with my tennis was I now had players around me who were a similar standard, and we would always push each other on in practice. And there was an element of almost jealousy when one player would go off and win a tournament, or maybe not jealousy, but it would make you think, this person is doing this. Wow, I can go out and achieve that. And initially I wasn't in the academy, but then I put in the work. And I think after a year of joining, I had a good year. I did well in certain tournaments, and I managed to be upgraded to the academy.
Well done. And now you are where you are. It was during your time at Reed School that you met your partner, Jack Moley, and went on to win 3 of the ITF double titles. How did this make you feel, and what did you learn from that experience?
One of the biggest things I'll take away from Reed is the people that I met there, and I'm still very close to all of them. Jack was another great player who was at Reed's with me. And again, it's the thing where you're both training together every day. You're spending more time with the people that you're playing tennis with than your own family. So you really get to know one another very well. And you're continually trying to push each other on as sparring partners. I think that I learned how to play doubles at Reed's, and I learned how to be part of a team, which I think is crucial and has helped me very much in my transition to collegiate tennis in the United States.
What did you find were the biggest challenges in your younger years?
I think that knowing what to prioritize is a very difficult challenge, especially when you're trying to play tennis to a high level and you're trying to achieve good grades in the classroom. There has to be some point where you have to make a decision to prioritize something on certain weekends where maybe you know that you're not going to get a great grade in this class because you've been playing tennis all weekend, or maybe vice versa. Maybe you need to study for an exam and you might have to sacrifice a bit of your tennis. So there's always that constant trade-off. And that's something which is challenging and something you have to manage. It's also tough mentally to focus on 2 different things at once. Sometimes I remember, you've been in the classroom for several hours and then you go onto the tennis court and your mind is thinking of history and geography and maths. And then you have to really focus on what you want to improve on in that session. So I'd say those 2 things are the most challenging things that I faced at Reed's.
I'm sure your history and maths teachers will be very complimented that you were still thinking about their lessons. Jack, your brother, turned professional in 2018 and recently did very well at Wimbledon, playing against Novak,
Djokovic.
Yes. How did that make you feel?
I was incredibly proud of him and everything that he had achieved. It's obviously surreal I've grown up with Jack and I've played tennis with him, as I mentioned, on the garage door since he was 2 years old. And now, all of a sudden, he's walking out in front of arguably the best player of all time on the biggest court of all time in front of a packed house and opening up the 2021 Wimbledon Championships. It's just this surreal feeling. I still remember when the draw was announced, I was actually at home just having a cup of tea and I almost choked on it because I was so shocked that he's actually playing Djokovic. The amount of sessions we've had where at the end of it, you hit one last serve and you'll say, okay, you're playing Djokovic or Federer or Nadal on centre court. Where are you going to serve? You've got to hit an ace. And now he's actually going out and doing that. I was incredibly proud.
I can imagine. You've just completed a 4-year tennis scholarship at UC Berkeley. What advice and support were you given with your application? And do you have any advice? We have lots of families who are considering universities in the US and particularly sports scholarships for other young people looking to explore that route.
Well, firstly, I think that the US collegiate sports system is incredible, and the amount of resources that they have there to enable you to excel both in the classroom and on the tennis court or whatever it might be, it's crazy. They have the most amazing setup in the world. And for someone like me who, as Richard mentioned, I want to have a backup option, certainly to my tennis, it gave me the opportunity to earn a degree whilst also being able to continue playing high-level tennis. I'd say for people who are applying, tell your story. Everyone is unique. And I think that these colleges want to hear your story. They're interested to know where you came from. And don't be afraid to put on your achievements.
Ben, would you say that opportunities are more accessible to a broader spectrum of people in the US or in the UK?
That's a really good question. You know what? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm not the best person to ask on that, but I think that for me, at least in the college system, I was given access to incredible resources, and you almost get spoiled by how much resources go into you and how much time and effort goes on. And really, it's very similar to the setup at Reeds, but on a larger scale.
How have you adapted to studying in the US?
As I just mentioned, I think that balancing academics and athletics is something which I'd already had experience in from doing it at Reeds, which really helped me transition to the US. I think it is a challenge trying to balance the two, and you have to get good at time managing and being able to switch off from tennis or switch off from your schoolwork so you can focus on the other challenge.
And have there been any particular challenges that you faced since going there?
I think that one of the biggest things about going to college, playing tennis, for example, is tennis is usually a very individual sport. But when you play it in the States, you're playing within a team. And there's some days where you can have a really good day and you can play exceptionally well and win your match. But if the team doesn't win, then it's a bad day for the team. So I think that initially when I came, it was a challenge of learning that actually, okay, now I'm not just competing for myself, I'm competing for something much greater than that. And likewise, if you have a terrible loss, but you don't have much time to think about that loss, you have to get right back on the other courts and support your peers.
That kind of leads into my next question. So how can the crowd affect your game, do you find, either positively or negatively?
I think that the key there is that the crowd can affect you either positively or negatively. I think that whenever you're playing in front of a crowd, you have nerves, and sometimes you can go out there and you can hit the first few balls and you feel like you're playing well, and then you settle in and maybe your opponent is a little bit nervous and they feel unsettled, and you can get quite an advantage quite quickly because of the crowd. But it can also work in the other way. There's a crowd watching, sometimes you can freeze up a little bit and start rushing. So it can work in both ways. I think that when you have a crowd who's there, who's really cheering you on and kind of making you feel settled in the match, that's when it can really help you. And it can also really demoralize the other person as well, your opponent.
Tough politics. Which coaches have made the most significant impact, do you feel, on your game, and why or how?
Prior to coming to Reeds, I was with a coach called Justin Shering, who really helped me technically and is a fantastic coach. Then I came to Reeds and I was with Ben Harron, Nick Greenhouse and Tony Lloyd. And having those blend of those three guys was really, really helpful for me. It gave me different perspectives on the technical aspect, but also the tactical aspect. And I'd say that these three coaches really had the most profound impact on my tennis career during that time when I was at Reeds and I was competing with other players who were a similar standard and trying to get one up on them and get better than them and make one more round in the tournament further than them for bragging rights the next day at lunch. So past that, my coaches at UC Berkeley and most recently Wake Forest have all really, really helped me.
Ben, I've got a quick question for you. If you were thinking about applying for or sending a child to a school or applying for a university place, and you were thinking about pursuing a specialism like tennis, what sorts of things would you be looking out for to help you make your decision?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think one thing to get right is the coach, because as I mentioned previously, you end up spending all day with your teammates, your coaches. And if you have a good coach who's not only knows his stuff on the court, but is also a great human being, then it makes your life a lot easier.
It's quite an important relationship.
It's so crucial. Yeah, it can be the difference between you really enjoying your time at college or maybe not quite enjoying it and then transferring. So I'd say make sure that you get the right coach and the right mentor who's going to guide you through college.
What have you been studying at UC Berkeley?
So I did pre-law, so I did legal studies at Berkeley. And I really enjoyed it.
Pretty tough course. So what has been the highlight of your tennis career to date?
I would say competing at Junior Wimbledon as a young kid aspiring to play tennis. You're always going to dream of playing in front of a crowd at Wimbledon. And I was fortunate enough to get that opportunity and I managed to win a round there. I still remember trying to get to sleep the night before and it just wasn't happening. I was thinking, oh God, I need to get some rest. But as we mentioned previously with the crowd, I got out there and the first game I just played lights out and actually won the first set 6-love. I think that I was just kind of on adrenaline and really in the zone. And then I got a little bit nervous, but managed to win in 3 sets. But I would say that's the highlight of my tennis career today.
Fantastic. And what advice would you give to a young person who is keen to either pursue a future in tennis or a sporting career?
I would say you really have to enjoy the process and really enjoy the journey and the ups and the downs, because there are moments that are terrible when you've lost a tight match and you feel so down, but then there's also those extreme highs as well. And I think that looking back on it now, maybe I didn't fully appreciate how much fun I had during every training session and every practice. You know, I'm out there practicing with my friends every day, my best friends. And I would say just enjoy the journey, enjoy the hard work, soak it all up, because you only get one shot at it.
And quite a lot of resilience, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly. But enjoy the tough moments, because that's what builds you and makes you stronger.
And how has RMG Associates supported children with tennis?
So from my perspective, I've had throughout my life a number of different incarnations, but all of them have been centered upon creating opportunities for young people. And my current incarnation through RMG Associates is based upon the fact that we are in a number of different parts of the country, beginning with participation programs and developing from those participation programs, if we're lucky enough, onto the journey of high performance. So we have funded programs, 2 programs, one of which is more embryonic than the other in Yorkshire. There's one in the Midlands, there are 2 in London, and then I've just started one in East Kent, and we're aiming to hit thousands of young people, getting them to pick up tennis rackets, putting coaches in place. And in certain circumstances, I'm able to help with the funding of those situations, but that's not my primary focus. My primary focus is where I'm involved is to show other organizations how they can attract investment because of what they put in place. It's the story and it is the structure which enables funding to be attracted.
And are you working specifically with tennis?
No, I work in sport, STEM, and scholarships and bursaries probably in general, and some elements of well-being and mental health. So we try and create those programs and groups of schools across the educational divide working together to achieve things. I have to say there was one thing which made me slightly furious recently, and that was an article in the Telegraph sports section, which was about funding 110% sports scholarships in cricket. And where I see something which is funding to just create reputational gain through your organisation becoming a winner and no emphasis upon creating widened access for everybody. So it's all about inbuilt advantage.
Ben, just to finish, do you have a funniest moment for us, tennis career so far?
That can't involve me, Ben.
Yeah, well, I was going to say one of them would be when Richard was trying to return my serve and I was just aiming for his body the whole time. No, I'm not sure I can pinpoint one, but I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, I probably didn't appreciate at the time how much fun I've had just every day, and, you know, getting to spend time on the amount of coach journeys I've done and the good fun banter that you have with your friends is what you look back on and really laugh about in the future. I think, just to add to what Richard said, for me, although Richard maybe didn't help with my serve on court, he was able to set up the structure. I think structure was the key word he mentioned around the program at Reeds. And having that structure was ultimately what enabled me and has enabled so many other players to come through that program and have success. But without Richard and without the structure that Reeds had, that wouldn't have been possible.
Thank you both very much for giving up your time today to speak to our Education Choices podcast. And Ben, good luck with your tennis career. I'm sure it's going to continue to be exciting. And thank you very much, Richard, also for giving up your time today to tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing behind the scenes.
Our pleasure.
Thank you very much.